And your marriage? I can't believe that this experience would be easy on a relationship.
It wasn't hard on the relationship. It was very hard on my wife. I mean, it's a terribly difficult thing. It was no day at the beach for me, but it was very difficult for her. But it wasn't hard in our relations. She knew that the charges were false, and our relationship is so strong that I don't think that it was strained overly, but she was strained as a person, as I was.
2 years ago, you were granted bail while appealing your fraud cases. And in fact, the Supreme Court...
I was granted bail after the Supreme Court vacated the counts.
And they had basically said that put aside all 4 convictions, but sent the case to a lower court, where in fact 2 of the convictions were ultimately upheld. What happened there?
Well, in that perverse American manner, having excoriated the appeal panel chairman and accused him, amongst other things, of demonstrating, and I quote Justice Ginsburg, who wrote the opinion for a unanimous court. I mean, there's one justice who recused, the former Solicitor General, but it was 8-0 and 1 abstention. Accused him of demonstrating the infirmity of invented law, and they declared the statute on which the prosecution based the case to be unconstitutional and ultra vires to the United States Congress. And instead of doing what I would have thought would be done, and what would be done in a comparable case in this country, and saying, if you want to convict this person, you're going to have to try him again, they remanded the 4 vacated counts back to the judge they had just excoriated and told him to assess the gravity of his own errors. Now, the judge in question, Richard Posner, is in the running for the most colossal megalomaniac in American history. And I mean, he told the New Yorker magazine that he was overlooked for nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States because he favored the legalization of marijuana. As I wrote in one of my critiques of Justice Posner in the National Review, it might have been that some of his other brainwaves, such as proposing that the adoption of children be by auction to the highest bidder, had something to do with it. But so Posner, being the personality that he is, retrieved on the most spurious conceivable grounds 2 lesser counts. The 2 main counts went. 90% of what was left went. But he retrieved 2 counts, and that was what this great prosecution, these 17 counts they started with racketeering, tax evasion, perjury, every manner of fraud. That was what they were reduced to. This fatuous nonsense with these boxes in an office in a foreign country, and $285,000 improperly received, supposedly, even though it is uncontested in the evidence that it was approved by the directors.
During the period of appeal, you're a free man for a year. Yet you had
It's a half-life. It's not really freedom. It was 14 months, and you're right, but I was free in the sense you mean it, but you're not really free. I'm free now, but I wasn't.
But you had to go back for an additional 7 months. I mean, how hard was that psychologically, knowing that?
I knew that was going to happen. I mean, it wasn't easy, but I wasn't surprised. I mean, that they were, even at that late stage, in that palace of corruption and hypocrisy of a courthouse in Chicago, they all locked arms to preserve the pretense that there was ever any justification for bringing this prosecution. It was, as I said to the London Guardian, hanging around their necks like a toilet seat, but still they hung on to it.
Now, you and I talked in that period when the hardcover of this memoir came out in New York, and I was amazed at how sanguine you seemed about the whole situation. But I also understand, subsequent to that discussion, is that you didn't fare that well in prison. In fact, when you were released, you were in fairly ill health.
No, that would be an exaggeration. I fared well in terms of getting along with people. Again, I had no difficulties. It was fine. But I had a couple of problems. I put on weight because I was living in the room with me was a chef from Boston. And the people who run the kitchen take stupefying amounts of food out. It's just vanishing inventory, you know. It's called grazing in the supermarket business. Well, and they would come around and ask people, you know, what they would like. And the currency is postage stamps, you know. There's no money in there, so you pay with postage stamps. And so we would, you know, we'd ask them for, you know, whatever. And then this chef would prepare it in the microwaves in the residential unit. And we would have quite a sumptuous dinner. There was no wine with it, and the silverware was nothing to write home about. But I ate well, and they were big portions, and I'm a victim of, and I'm sure again, like many people here, our mothers always told us to finish what was on our plate. You see, so it's a habit, and so I added weight, and I think at times I had problems with my blood pressure, but there was never any evidence of that. I didn't faint or anything like that, but I had to take some pills for blood pressure as well as cholesterol.
But you clearly were not among those 20% who were clinging to the fences to stay there. I mean, you wanted out, and you were anxious that things might not go well.
You mean before I went back there for 7 months?
No, just upon your release, your final release.
Oh, no, I wasn't. No, again, that was all worked out with the governments of both countries some time before. And there was, I had no problems of that kind. I know there was a great speculation in the press in this country about whether the Americans would detain me and confine me with, you know, deported Mexican
even where
gang
you would
members
go.
Or something. And whether Canada would admit me. But you see, I could never take seriously the idea that anyone really suggested I should never be allowed to set foot in this country. I'm not seeking to be a citizen. I just wanted to visit the country.
I want to get to that too, but
on the American side, they made it clear early on they weren't trying to detain me. They just wanted, their great problem is people that they declare to be ineligible to remain in the country, they want them to leave. Once I explained to the immigration official who came to visit me that he had to understand that he could not possibly imagine how enthusiastic I was to leave his country, and I could do so by flapping my arms if necessary. Then he said, oh, well, in that case, we can, you know, that'll be fine.
Well, in fact, the entire experience seems to have significantly cooled your ardor for the United States. You also write in the memoirs, when you sold your home, you came to see Palm Beach as a vulgar infestation of fat, rich, dumb, gauche Americans. In fact, you write explicitly that your love affair with America is over. Explain that.
Am I explaining my comment on Palm Beach society or on the United States?
That you had always, I mean, you in fact, on many occasions previous to this whole episode, would scold Canadians that there's much to be learned from America, and that if Canadians really had their stuff together, we could be even better than America.
Well, yeah, but there was some truth to that when I said it. But there's some truth to it. But yes, let me give a fair answer here. On the Palm Beach part of it, I was overstating it a bit there, but you know, of course, there's some nice people there, and it's a lovely town in some ways.
And they were your neighbors.
I wasn't specifically criticizing my neighbors. Actually, my neighbors were quite nice. But and I got on fine there. But what you'd get in Palm Beach is these people who have made a huge amount of money in a very narrow specialty, and like actresses or sports figures who try and transpose their celebrity in one area to another, and you know, go out campaigning politically and things like that. They think they know everything about everything, and it's not like the higher income echelon of a large city, where you get all kinds of different people. There tend to be a profusion in that town of people who are absolutely insufferable know-it-alls. If you happen to be sitting next to them at dinner or something, and they don't actually know anything except how to make paper cups or something, you see. And it's just such a huge market. You can make a large fortune in obscure areas, you see. And that's really what I was referring to. And also, and I'm giving you a broader answer than you wanted, but I was terribly disillusioned by the failure of American capitalism in 2008. I was stupefied that nobody saw coming. I mean, I myself was warning until I was blue in the face about the dangers of an $800 billion current account deficit, but I wasn't in the real estate business, and I knew nothing about these non-commercial mortgages. And that the entire banking system would push out trillions of dollars of worthless securities, that the rating agencies, whom I well remembered from my days as a securities issuer, being quite demanding and exigent, would certify it all to be investment grade, as if it came from Hydro-Quebec or something, and they would shovel. I mean, the great Goldman Sachs would shovel billions of this rubbish out on its clients at the same time that in its house accounts out the back door it was shorting them. I mean, I was truly shocked, and nobody saw it coming. Not no bankers, merchant bankers, investment bankers, lending bankers, central bankers, nobody. No one on the political side, no financial journalists, and no economic academicians except for Nouriel Roubini, who's a crank, who's now telling us that Greece should emulate Argentina. You know, as I wrote the other day in reference to him, even a clock that stopped tells the right time twice a day. And that's what he did. But nobody else saw it coming. So I shot now. But anyway, that takes care of Palm Beach. On the United States itself, look, it is, of course, the greatest country in the world. And it is a great country, very great country, incomparably great in some ways. But I am, first of all, I think it is in decline. It is not as distinguished a country as it has been at times in its history. And secondly, it is a terribly corrupt country. I mean, not compared, perhaps, or definitely not compared to what used to be called third world countries, most of them, but compared to its natural peers, compared to other countries of relatively comparable living standards, it is. And it's a rather delusional place in some ways.
The book also launches a very kind of comprehensive criticism of the U.S. judicial system, above and beyond the specifics of your case, especially
the whole justice system, and not just the judiciary, but the legal profession and the custodial system.
And the over-incarceration systematically of the poor blacks and Hispanics. I mean, reading it,
and people generally, even if it was only whites, it's still too many. I mean, the United States has 5% of the world's population, 25% of its incarcerated people, and 50% of its lawyers. The lawyers take 10% of GDP, $1.5 trillion. It's just another form of taxation. Of course you have to have a society of laws, but where you have a federal legislature and 50 state legislatures and all the municipalities churning out laws and regulations all the time, creating more work for this festering steroid bloated cartel of lawyers, it's going to end badly.
You in particular have problems and very critical of the U.S. System of plea bargaining. And again, in the book you say that it is nakedly the exchange of altered testimony for varied sentences. Do you think that was the case? Do you think that's what happened with your old partner, David Radler, when he testified against you?
Yes. He was the one person, that whole thing, who did in fact commit crimes, and I was the chief victim of it, and that came out in the trial in his misrepresentation of a related party transaction where he told everyone he would have 25% of it, and in fact he had 50%. And when this came to light, you see, when disgruntled shareholders who were just really greenmailers trying to force the sale of the company because they wanted a quick gain for themselves, asked for a special committee, I said right away, fine, let's have a special committee. I mean, we haven't done anything wrong, let's have a special committee that will clear the area, you see. But I didn't know that it would come upon, and I wouldn't have changed my answer if I had known, but I didn't know it would come upon misfeasances of his. So when this came to light, he made his deal with the prosecutors. That, don't worry, I'll give you a bigger fish, even if we have to take down some other people with him, the company counsel and so forth, if in exchange for this. So that's what happened. That's how the system works. If let's say they targeted, let's say we were in the United States now, and they target you for some reason, and some of the motivations of prosecutors are pretty esoteric. Then they go to your 5 or 8 closest associates in whatever the potentially controversial matter is, and they say, look here, you'd better remember that Alan Gregg did such and so. Well, a bad thing, you say. And the person says, no, I don't recall that. And furthermore, I know Alan, I don't believe he would do that. And they say, well, you better jog your memory or we're indicting you too. And that's what happens. That's how they operate.
That's how
Everybody
plea bargaining works.
It's just a straight intimidation and extortion game. It's a disgrace.
You and Radler were partners for some 38 years. I mean, have you spoke to him or talked to him since the trial?
No, not for 7 years.
As much as your judicial battles, I mean, I think that probably what has formed public opinion towards you more than anything else was your acceptance of the peerage and declining continued Canadian citizenship. And that while I think many would agree that the choice that then Prime Minister Chrétien offered you was an odious one, it was nonetheless a choice that you made. Do you regret that with the passage of time?
That isn't quite what happened. There are a great many people who are Canadian citizens who hold British honors of one kind and another. And there is no reason, no legal reason why this can't be done. And so when the leader of the opposition at the time, now the Foreign Secretary, William Hague, asked me if I would be a peer, Conservative Party peer, and I said that I would, and then the Prime Minister, my relations with him were very good. Tony Blair still are very good. And even though I was associated with the other party, he couldn't have been more cooperative. He took it upon himself to have the British High Commissioner in Ottawa ask the opinion of the Canadian government about whether anything needed to be done here. And the chief of protocol in the government of Canada said, no, this is fine, but he should be a dual citizen and not use the title when he's in Canada. And with that, Tony Blair phoned me himself and said, this is what they've said. There's no problem. I'm sending around to you an application for citizenship, and put in Jack Straw, who was then the Home Secretary, and myself as your referees, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. And the driver will wait for it. So I did. I filled it out, gave it back to him. And an hour later, the driver, or some driver anyway, was back with a form that I was now a British citizen, with a congratulatory note from the Prime Minister. And this was what Canada wanted. Then somehow, and again, I think it's quite well known, and his own biographer, Lawrence Martin, wrote this, for reasons that he objected to what he thought to be negative coverage in some of the newspapers I was associated with. Chrétien heard about this and became upset and said to the senior advisor to the Queen that Robert Fell, as it was at the time, Princess Diana's brother-in-law, that Canadian law required him to object to this, which is rubbish. There's no such law. And the Queen knew perfectly well that this was mistaken advice. But she asked Tony Blair, please don't put me in the position of having to choose between the advice of 2 prime ministers of countries where I'm the sovereign. And he told me this. And I said, well, of course we can't do that. So my appointment was delayed. Then we litigated in Canada on the issue of the ability of Chrétien to create a category of one person in a foreign country ineligible for an honor in that country for services deemed to have been rendered in that country because he also happened to be a citizen of Canada, a dual citizen. And again, there's a large number of members of the House of Lords in the same position. And Chrétien made it clear, for example, to a number of people, but to name one, Peter Mandelson, who was here in Toronto a few weeks ago, in one of these debates downtown with other Neil Ferguson and others, and that there was really only one governing party federally in Canada, and Chrétien, named the judges, and there'd be no problem with this. And indeed, the first court and then the Court of Appeal just rolled over like poodles and said they didn't have jurisdiction. So I made a statement. I withdrew as a Canadian citizen, said I would take it back as soon as I could, and why I was doing it. Now, I did not see it as it has been represented, as renouncing Canada for in order, as I think Jeffrey Stevens put it in the Globe and Mail at the time, in order to go fox hunting or something, with people and hunting pinks, this kind of thing. And I saw it as the only legislature I was ever going to get into, because it was an election of one, and there was only one. I didn't have to be reelected.
But knowing how it has been interpreted, if you had to do it over again, would you? Would you follow the same course?
As things stand now, no, I wouldn't. And I understand why people feel as they do, but it isn't entirely fair. Now, a lot of things that aren't fair happen, and that's hardly something that I'm unaware of after all the events we've been talking about, or indeed was unaware of before. So I think the answer is yes, but I am hoping to make clear over time to anyone who's interested, without being the pub bore about it, what actually happened. And a lot depends on whether I actually use that peerage. It's a wonderful legislative house. It has an absolutely unequaled amount of talent in it compared to any other legislature in the world. It's not just inheritors of 8 generations ago famous people. There are almost none of those left, and they have to go through the roughest election of all. The 96 hereditaries are chosen from amongst 1,500 possible candidates amongst the hereditaries, and they're only chosen for life. There are no hereditary peerages now amongst those who actually serve in that house, and you get a tremendous number of terribly interesting people. The day I was inducted, the Conservative whip said to me, "Remember, no matter what the subject is, there's always somebody in this house who knows more about it than you do." And that is true. And you can't say that in every parliament.